host for this 4th edition of Season 6 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And we're going with a little image again because we want to show some background images that are going to relate to today's show topic. Let's see. I just want to mention very briefly, archive shows are available for Esoteric Science Roundtable, along with Therefore I Am, Freedom Perspective, a whole host of other interesting things up there as well. You can find linked more or less to our shows that are up there, Google Video, and then also the Community Listening Network, or cln.org, is another way to hear archive shows, and just other hosts as well that are like-minded topics. So I encourage people to check those options out when you have time. Let's see. Today's topic is going to be Backyard Banquet. And so what I'm hoping to give some insight into and some consideration towards is the concept that in the event of a catastrophe or some situation in which the grocery stores are not open and the bank card is not working the way it normally would, and we have to find alternative means to feed ourselves and things of this nature, I want to kind of get a little bit of thinking along those lines, but not in a way that's going to be fearful, hopefully. I want to put this in the context of more of a preparedness Boy Scout kind of adventure mentality, and also kind of getting to know your own area a little bit better. I encourage people to do that with what information I'll be bringing forward here in a second. So in the event of a situation in which there were no power available, for instance, and obviously refrigeration would not be a viable option, then we're going to have to think of ways in which we can, get some kind of some food sustenance. And really, if it does get to that point, we have to consider at least a little bit that there might be people. There are a lot of guns in this country, quite frankly, and there are a lot of people that are going to use that as a first option in order to maintain their well-being. And so I want to, again, craft this show and the sentiment of the show around not having to resort to those extreme means to have to provide for our families, defend ourselves, and what have you. So there is information out there, and there's a more peaceable way to prepare for these potential situations. I always think that any kind of a preparation needs to go hand in hand with innovation, in the sense that you can't prepare for every eventuality, so there has to be some innovative, intuitive component that goes along with any Boy Scout style preparedness that we may want to consider. And so considering, and I'm going to go over some of these, and these will repeat towards the end, so the early ones I'm not so concerned about because they repeat in a second, or towards the end of the show, I should say, rather. But in my humble estimation, and this isn't accepted science by any stretch, but I envision, in times, ages long ago, a very fundamental key component or cornerstone of the esoteric science is that we are spiritual, having a material experience. And so by virtue of some of that, some of the theories, I guess, the idea is that we were much more spiritual, and even today is kind of a little bit reminiscent of that, with me kind of looking halfway here and halfway not there. I think we were much more akin to this condition, quite frankly, in that we weren't all the way fully, immersed in the physical nature. And so gradually, I feel that we became less spiritual and more material, and this was an ebb and flow kind of cyclic process. So as we became more material and more ingrained in the physical nature, we had to start to partake of sustenance from the physical plane. And I think the process in which that played out was one in which we received our energy or our sustenance in a much more energetic or spiritual fashion initially. And I even feel that early humanity had much more of a psychic capacity and an ability to understand by observing around the world around them and seeing the energy nature. I feel that our spiritual nature and our spiritual vision was such that we could still visualize the essence of things, living things in particular. And so my feeling is this is how early man gained his ability to discern what was edible, what wasn't edible, what was good, bad, what could be used in a medicinal sense, all these sorts of things. I think that the qualities within the plant, let's say, or an animal, was something they could see. And so they knew it wasn't a matter, I don't think, at this point of trial and error, as we might think logically would happen, that, Zug Zug tried to eat this plant, he died, don't eat that plant. I think that we did resort to that later, and I think that was part of our, we had to, again, get re-ingrained in the physical and all that, and then after high civilizations subside, then we have to rebuild, and then you find the stone tool kind of mentality and the rebuilding of civilization taking place. And so, I think once that we did get into the more material nature, that we did have to experiment in this fashion, that we did have to look and rather taste and experiment and find out in this fashion what was good and what was bad. Even the tomato plant, up until I think it was maybe less than 200 years ago, that we considered the tomato to be not good for us, poison, I think, even perhaps, if I'm not mistaken. And so we had to relearn, I feel, a lot of what would be sustaining and what would not be sustaining. So also in the context of that as well, when it comes to what we should be eating in our diet and what we should avoid, the argument between, carnivore, meat eater versus vegetarian kind of lifestyle would come up as well. Certainly, if you eat a plant, you're taking the plant's life. So if that's the argument, that you can argue against that. I would factor in that there's a level of consciousness that's been attained by animals, and so I won't really go past the fish level in my own diet. I think that fish, and worst case scenario, insect, and I'll get into that a bit more later in the show, would be viable options for my particular choice. Granted, now if you're in a situation in which these things aren't available, if you get really hungry, you're willing to do things. And the Donner Party, in the Rocky Mountains is an example of that. And that's something that I would really hope that we would not have to resort to, is eating at one another. But, I think worst case, we would have to consider these options. I've eaten animals in the past, and I would prefer not to. And so, but, under the circumstances, I would not rule that out, obviously. I want to sustain my life and live like most of us do. So, there's a lot of health information that shows how the colon, the large intestine, the small intestine, processed food and how things tend to stay in there, especially meat-related sort of things and the sort of processed foods that we have in our diet. And this is really something that people would have to make a rapid adjustment to in the event that all of a sudden their diet had to change that radically, even though, they may have stored food, or they may have, meat that they can have access to canned or what have you, that they could still maintain that diet. But if there was a sustained period where the stores weren't available, then there would have to be some way in which to obviously get food. And I think that after that food source was gone, then obviously the bodies would have to readjust. And that would happen with everybody that was accustomed to eating meat and accustomed to eating the types of, the modified food, starch, and all the preservatives, and the aspartame in the soft drinks, and all that. People would have to have a detox from that. And that in and of itself would be very, very traumatic and very stressful for many people. Just that small aspect of not even the idea that there won't be stores available to you to have food and stuff. It's just that little detox process initially, I think, would be very painful for many, many segments of the population. They can't go without that Diet Coke, or they get the headache, or they get the shakes. So that would have to take place, in which people would have to develop their appetites and change their appetites. And that is part and parcel of esoteric science as well, is a whole idea of appetites. We have our lower appetites for the more material nature of life, and then we have our more higher abstract appetites for spiritual things, more philosophical ideas, more abstract kind of thinking. So we can center our appetites where we choose. And granted, again, if we're in a situation where we have to find food, we're going to probably resort towards the lowest common denominator in some respects, and we're going to want to first and foremost seek that sustenance to sustain ourselves. But there are appetites that if we have a chance to develop and discern with our appetites and our attitudes, again, that's part of what is tied into thinking in a fashion that one becomes more as one thinks. So if one is thinking more peacefully, one is thinking more blissfully, joyfully, then theoretically that is what one exudes and actually ends up becoming. If we are anxiety and we're fear-ridden and we're stress-ridden, then that's going to demonstrate in our physical makeup, and it's going to be evident. We'll have health problems and we'll suffer as a result. So again, there would be a lot of transition points to consider that would have to play out essentially. So again, a lot of what I'm going to speak about would really be null and void in the event of some sort of a nuclear holocaust, catastrophe. Even a small one potentially could, wreak havoc on any potential vegetation. And so that, in that instance, none of really, or very little of what I'm saying would probably have any real value. And so in that respect, maybe some kind of storing of things, who's to say how can you protect against radiation and things like that and guarantee the food's going to be okay? That's really a crapshoot to say, to put it mildly. So again, if that were to happen, this might render all of this information null and void. We do, I think, have much food in nature around us, and anybody that can just think for half a second, here in this area alone, if we think about the indigenous foods, and I think also it's important that we try to eat indigenous foods first. I think it's more important that we eat the foods that are around us, that are, raised in the ground, in the dirt that we essentially came from, if you want to look at it in that sense, in the literal sense of what our body is made up of by virtue of being in a particular location, and in the metaphysical sense, the energetic and the magnetic relation to a place, a location. So I feel that it's more beneficial to eat the indigenous, what's available indigenously, again, whether that's meat or vegetarian fare. And considering, again, just from the plant life and what you can have available right in the midst of where we are right now. There are many kinds of nuts available. Certainly pecans may come to mind, should come to mind. There are mulberries. There are the loquats that grow on the bushes. You can find persimmons, pomegranates, wild grapes, honeysuckle. And those are just a very, very few. The different kind of wild berries and things that grow. A lot of these things just pop up without a lot of tending. So there's much available that's indigenous. And again, I think that is something that we should take into consideration with our diet, is to try to eat locally if at all possible. And so, in the current situation, going to the grocer and picking up the locally grown produce, I think, is more beneficial because, again, I think it's more akin to what our nature is, and so would theoretically be more assimilable and better for our bodies. So that's just a consideration. And again, I want to continue to interject occasionally that, in the event that there is no grocery store available, I would like people to try to maintain some sort of civility towards one another. Again, there are a gob of guns, there are a gob of unaccounted for guns that are not registered. And I say quite thankfully so as well. Ultimately, I'm a very fervent supporter of the Second Amendment from an energetic perspective more so than, being a physical holder of guns. Although, I do enjoy target practice and shooting guns and stuff like that. To me, it's entertaining. It's fun. But, I want to, again, try to engender more of a spirit of cooperation than competition. Competition is good when it's in a spirit of fun and it's, we can agree upon it, but the competition that would take place in the event of, again, no power available, no supermarkets, would quickly, I think, result into a bad kind of competition. So, again, I want to continue to integrate that, if we could please kind of continue to maintain a cool head. These images that I'm showing are of plants that are available that we can consume, and there are different ways. A lot of these plants that I'm showing images of can be eaten outright. You can just grab it and eat it, eat the roots raw. Some of these things have to be prepared. They have to be boiled, soaked in water. Some of these plant life the seeds are good. There are various factors, and so this is not to be meant as a survival guide in that respect. This is just to kind of engender that sort of thinking. And I think also it would be fun and entertaining to go into your backyard, for instance, or go when you're walking around the neighborhood and you're looking around and you're seeing all the plant life, the flora and the fauna, to start to be able to identify some of these things and consider what actually could be used in the event of food available. Again, an idea of carrying and storing a lot of food. If you're going to be in one place and you're going to be able to secure that, that's certainly an option. For some reason, I envision if things really get crazy, I envision myself being in much more of a nomadic role, and I don't know why that is. I just feel that to be the case, that I'll be wandering around, and I'll be looking more so for these whatever's available. The backyard banquet that I'm going to be trying to partake of. Nature again is so abundant. There's so much. The planet is plentiful, and so we can look around, become familiar with a lot of this stuff, and we can see what's available. There's so many things, and there's so much stuff as well that I think completely take for granted that we're not aware of. That. Sweet, appreciate that. So there, again, these things are available. And obvious things, again, with the nuts and things like that. But again, trying to carry around, if you're going to become mobile, a lot of things, it doesn't make sense to me, and can be something that you're going to need. And that's another point I want to make as well. Clean water is really ultimately going to be more important. Certainly you're going to need the sustenance, but clean water is going to be what's really going to provide. It's going to help us to get through anything. People have tried to commit suicide by starving themselves, and after about 70 some odd days, they realized that they were still around. And this has proven itself over and over again, that people can live a considerable amount of time without food if they can just take in a little bit of water, still keep the body hydrated. Excuse me. So, in the event of no food, clean water really is going to be the most I think sought after commodity in this instance. And so, depending on where we are, obviously, is going to change what we have access to, certainly. And if we find ourselves in a coastal area, if we find ourselves by lakes or ponds, then that opens up a whole nother avenue of potentials for getting food. We can eat certain things from the ocean. Some of the plant life is available for some of the different plant life that's the coastal stuff. And then certainly if we factor in fishing into the diet, then that factors in as well. We could certainly have a bit more of a biblical outlook on things, and we can get John the Baptist and look for wild honey and locust and hang out with those for a while. That's another option, and I would not shun those opportunities. Honey certainly is wonderful. Locusts, maybe with a little honey on them, they're not too bad. I don't know, but that again is hearkening back to a tried and true method that's been around for a long time, and certainly. There are other things too here. Figs you find here in the area. I could list other things. I just kind of try to go from just the top of my head with a few things that I thought of, and I'm sure that list could grow quickly if I really gave it some more consideration. Let's see. So there are things as well that are herbs like mint and things like that we can use, and there are a variety of different types of herbs that grow that can be made into teas, for instance. And it can be prepared in different various ways. And so if we're going to be considering a situation in which we don't have access to, again, your normal stores and things like that, you would obviously want to have a way in which you could prepare and store and manipulate your food. So some sort of storage container that would keep out the critters and keep out the atmosphere and the environment, keep it in a sealed place. Let's see, and probably some sort of a cutting utensil, some way to start fire, because a lot of these things, different flora and fauna and these different various edible natural naturally occurring plants or what have you, you do have to boil the root or boil the leaves or what have you in certain instances. And so you would obviously, in light of that, want to have, and you're going to want to have light and fire anyway, but certainly you want to be at least a little bit prepared to prepare the food ultimately. Some things are going to need to be dried out or what have you. In the event that we're able to maintain the same place and able to grow a garden, for instance, then we could theoretically stay and tend and all that and have access to something. But that's in light of being able to stay in one place and hopefully not having people coming to take your stuff from you as well. So again, that's another consideration. There are certainly mushrooms that grow wild that some might be familiar with, and not. And most of the mushroom varieties that grow wild are not edible by humans. And so just to go out and say, oh, that's a mushroom, let's eat that, I'm hungry, that's not a good suggestion. I do not suggest that whatsoever. Be very cautious. There are a couple of mushrooms that occur in the wild that are edible. And the one I'm going to definitely mention, because I actually did a show a number of years ago on this particular mushroom, is the Amanita muscaria mushroom. And this is the mushroom that's portrayed in all the fairy tale stories with the red and the white cap. It is an edible mushroom, and it has been, there are supposedly psychedelic effects. I never really have gotten a whole heck of a lot of that, quite frankly. And the way in which that can be prepared is just simply dried. If that, and it grows in Washington State and places like that. It doesn't obviously grow so readily here in Texas, but there are places in the States where you can find quantities of these amanitas. And not only do they have food and sustenance, qualities, but they also have very, very strong antibiotic properties. And so this is where, again, some of the herb/food sustenance are going to also have curative properties as well. And so by simply eating them, you're going to get those health benefits as well. And from my own experience, definitely the Amanita muscaria has definitely the antibiotic properties. And I think eating it is good and beneficial. If you do consume dried Amanita muscaria, you do not want to have any carbonated beverages. You don't want to drink a soda. You don't want to drink a beer. No carbonated beverages, because it'll revert back to its more natural state, and you won't be feeling well. You'll probably find yourself on the ground. So you don't want to do that. But it can be prepared different ways. And even the gentleman I had on a number of years ago that spoke specifically about the Amanita, you can make a little spore thing, like a gruel kind of thing, in which the spores stay alive, and you just give them a little food, and then the spores stay alive, and then you can make more of this Amanita substance to consume. It does, according to legend and history, have some hallucinogenic properties. I can't really say that I've ever really experienced anything too extreme really worth mentioning. So that's why I would really recommend it as a food substance or sustenance to pretty much anybody. And I know other people that have consumed it as well, kind of across the spectrum. It hasn't affected them in that fashion. Again, so it can be more used as food as long as it's not consumed with anything carbonated. So that's a definite consideration. So while I'm in that little vein, I would go ahead and mention, while I'm at it, the hemp plant or the cannabis plant. That is a good source of protein from the seeds particularly. It has what's considered the perfect protein ratio for humans. And I think other animal life as well. Certainly birds can eat it, and other animals you see. There are a number of other animals that go out of their way to try to track down the hemp plant or the cannabis plant in their neck of the woods, elephants being one example. You can eat the whole plant, and there's a differentiation. Actually, this book that I borrowed these images from, How to Live Through a Famine by Dean L. Rasmussen, I do take a little exception with a couple of the statements, because he does say that the Amanita can be poisonous, and I haven't really encountered that. I don't know that to be true and factual. Also, he does mention cannabis, and he says that certain animals have been known to die from ingesting that. And I find that highly suspect and suspicious. I've never heard of anything dying, eating or consuming cannabis in my experience. So if I could be corrected on that, I'd be interested in finding more out about that. But I don't think that's the case. And so as much good information as in the book, I think there's a couple of things in here that have to be taken with a grain of salt and considered more so. It actually even mentions, again, the Amanita is mentioned in here, and it talks about boiling it and that it allegedly is poisonous. Well, it's not poisonous because I've consumed a lot of the dried, variety, and I didn't even feel close to anything near a death condition. So those are, again, different aspects of these that are, they're medicinal as well as giving us food sustenance. Here we have a very common one, the Helianthus anise, and that's a sunflower. I'm sure most of you recognize the common sunflower, and that is quite prevalent in this area, and you can obviously extract the seeds from the sunflower. I was going to get into, I guess, more detail with some of the different ways to prepare some of these, but I think I would rather, at this point, kind of leave that to the individual viewer's own research as to what they want to find, what uses they can find from, again, the different plants in their backyard. I probably will give some examples in a second, but there are other aspects of this information, I guess the more metaphysical aspects of it that I kind of want to cover more so. So I want to go with that until it gets later in the game, and then I may go with the book a bit more, take some phone calls as well. Something that was mentioned recently on Jeff Contreras' show a couple of weeks ago, and something that I've been a proponent of for a long time as well, not that I'm a regular religious practitioner, is the sun gazing. And I think that harkens back to what I spoke of at the beginning of the show, that I feel our physical nature was more ethereal, and that spirit substance was more of our makeup, and the dense material human had yet to come into manifestation, we'd yet to delve down far into the material plane enough to be the material beings that we know and recognize in the world today. So I think the spiritual man that existed previous to us, that is us in essence, essentially, did take in sunlight in this fashion, and that the sun gazing is just a way in which we can recapture this ability to gain sustenance from light. We are light. We are condensed light. It's a very simple way to put a complex state, but we are condensed light in the simplest terms. And so when we take in light in that sense, our eyes allow us to take in light sustenance, and that's the vitamin D in the sun, certainly, and the warmth of the sun and all of that. There's a reason why we feel that attraction towards that particular body, and we do have a definite relation to it. When we look into the sun and the sun gazing, the times that you would want to consider that would be in the morning as the sun is rising, and then in the evening as the sun is setting low on the horizon. You have about an hour window on either side of that, sunrise and sunset. And that's the time you want to gaze at the sun. You don't want to gaze at it directly when it's in the midday noon position, because that's obviously going to potentially burn your eyes, and you'll find out quickly that you're not going to be able to gaze up at the bright sun for very long. But in the condition with the sunrise and the sunset, you can actually gaze straight into it. And after a number of minutes elapse, my experience has been that I feel the pituitary and the pineal gland inside the center of my brain, inside my head, kind of going, wah, 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 and saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. They feel that light coming in, and I do feel it stimulates the pineal and the pituitary. I do feel that just like flowers, the sunflower is a great example. Esoterically, the sunflower has been revered and symbolized as the plant that stares straight into the face of the sun without flinching, without any reservations. And that was revered and admired, and so that quality was symbolized through the sunflower. We also, I feel, like plants, have that innate need to orient ourselves towards the sun, and we do in our lives. We orient ourselves to the sun in many respects. If we would just think about it, we've gotten away from that, obviously, with the alarm clocks and all the artificial mechanisms that we put in place. But nonetheless, the sun very much does affect us. I mean, just think about daylight savings time when you have to lose that hour or gain that hour. For me personally, it throws me off kilter for about a good, 4 days on on the other side of it actually, before I get readjusted. And that's just me. Other people are like, you're silly, it's just an hour or whatever. I don't know. And I think that ties in with the whole pituitary pineal stimulation thing if you're sun gazing. I think people, because I've meditated for so long, that already stimulates and accentuates and opens, if you will, that particular center or that pair of centers that already was awakened or in tune to a certain degree. And so I think that lends to that. I think people that aren't in that kind of meditative or in a position where they can just kind of stay still for a while may not have such success, and they might find that it's more annoying to them to try to stare into the sun, and they may not get any noticeable effects. And you really wouldn't get immediate noticeable effects, besides perhaps what I was saying with the sensitivity in the center of the head, and that's going to vary, I think, from person to person as well. But I think that sun gazing is viable. I do believe stories that I've heard of individuals that no longer take in food sustenance whatsoever. They may once in a while have some water or something like that, or they would have a little water, but they, anything like maybe a milk or buttermilk, or somebody offered them something out of gratitude, they might accept it to be courteous. But other than that, they would not need to eat. I do feel that is the case. I do feel that there are people that have achieved that and no longer need to eat physical food. And I can even account or attest to my own lessening of appetite over time, that you can really get by on a minimum of food, preferably good quality food. If you can get the organic stuff, obviously that's best. And organic stuff almost always, invariably, is going to be more expensive. The less ingredients, the less they can keep that thing preserved on the shelf for a year or two, still allow you to buy it. The less ingredients, the more expensive things are going to be. They have less of a shelf life, but that's the better stuff for you. And excuse me, even the oils that are available for our use, there are some really good ones that I would recommend to people if they're going to have oil in their diets. If they're going to cook anything with oil or use oil in dressings, for instance, the ones I would really recommend would be the coconut oil, and not so much for dressings, but for just uses frying or what have you. Other food preparation. Grapeseed oil is wonderful for frying, and olive oil is reasonably good for frying. Grapeseed oil to me is the most amazing oil that I've encountered, and I use it religiously. I use it for so many things. It can be used in the place of olive oil very readily, and I think it's better. And if you read on the label, it's high on antioxidant, to the translation from the Italian. So it has more antioxidant property than olive oil. And so grapeseed oil is something I highly recommend to people. You can just glug, 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 drink it out of the bottle, and it won't have an ill effect on you. Some people are afraid of the oils, and that's the hydrogenated oils. That's the kind of Crisco-esque, I guess. Here you might see behind me the dandelion. The dandelion and the dandelion leaves and roots are also very, very common around here, and they can be eaten. It's not just something that kids use and blow to scatter out the seeds and make a wish on. You can actually use that for food sustenance, and it's very common everywhere that I'm familiar with. I can't think of a place I've been where I haven't seen dandelions. And a lot of these that are indigenous to one area, you have different types. You're going to find this type in this part of the country, and this type in this part of the country, but everybody's got a dandelion, for instance, or something like that, but it's a little slight difference. There's a slight difference in the variety, perhaps. But nonetheless, they're going to be pretty much edible across the board, to my understanding. And again, I'm not, I would ask people to do, some of their own research along these lines. Don't just take this as, a survival course, because this is something that I'm still kind of piecing together as well. And having that attitude of preparation without having, the anxieties of, what if this and what if that, Again, I think where preparation meets innovation and the intuition can be factored in, then we can proceed with wisdom and not just run around with it like a chicken with its head cut off and, just not have a game plan. I think to try to stay calm and see things through in a calm, clear reasoning fashion is only to our benefit. Anytime that we just fly off the handle and we act irrationally, we always suffer for the consequences. So to think things through, just kind of slowly, as much as we're able. Obviously, there are going to be certain situations where you're going to have to grab and go. And that's where I think some preparation is due, in the sense of having an idea of where things are that you want to grab. And, because chances are, if you hit the ground running and you assess what you've amassed, and you're like, oh, I don't have a way to start a fire, or I don't have a way to do this, I don't have a container to seal things, any number of things. I forgot the water. These are the things that you're gonna, you will regret in the event of an emergency or some sort of situation. I know in times past, when there have been some storm activity, going just to the local grocery store, people were really grabbing pretty much everything, and like all the bread would be gone, for instance. How long is bread going to last? That's not really something I would think about getting a whole lot of. So that kind of thinking as well. What will keep? So things that can be dried, I think, are certainly, because things that are dried are lighter. They're much lighter. Canned things are going to weigh a lot. And obviously water is going to weigh a lot, but if we have a means to clean water, that's probably the way to go. So, that's probably a point of consideration for people. How do we clean our water? Maybe we don't have clean water, but how can we clean water we can get access to? That's something. And there's certain survivalist tips about gathering dew and gathering liquid, from plant leaves and things like that. And that's a consideration, certainly. That may have to break down to that sort of thing. But if we can have a device or some sort of means by which we can clean water, there's tablets and there are filters that you can purchase that are very effective. And those are the sorts of things that I would caution people towards, giving a look-see towards and considering that. Now, once again, not trying to come across in a fear-based, anxiety mode with this preparation consideration. More so want to just, give people the reassurance that there are other options. I want to give people the reassurance that there are viable options in your own backyard that you can have access to, that you don't have to be frightened that in the event of no power, no food, that you're going to be out in the cold, so to speak. There's ways that we can get past this. Now, certainly developing a sense of community and having a group of people, perhaps, a group of people certainly, but a group of, friends, family, whoever, that group would be comprised of, that you can depend on at least enough to maybe have a contingency plan with. And, maybe this guy has more guns and you don't have this many guns or whatever. Now, again, and I'm not trying to make that the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the matter in this instance. I look at guns as energy. It's a deterrent in the fact that you hold up a gun, all you have to do is hold it up in most cases, and that instant recognition, that instant energetic would be, it's all you really need in most instances. And again, I'm not trying to, suggest that threatening is a way to go either. This is kind of a bit of a delicate dance. This is a little bit more, a little off topic in some respects from what I would normally cover. But it fascinates me to be able to just go into the backyard and be able to just grab things and be able to prepare, some sort of a salad or just be able to get by without having to depend on the man, so to speak. So many people are used to the dole out, and I think that another segment of the population that would probably have a difficult time adjusting would be people that are so used to that government check coming every month. If you're so used to, like clockwork, going like a rat to the little feeding place and getting your little pellet of food, you're gonna have to break that conditioning quickly. And those are the people that are potentially might not be prepared, because if you get in the mindset of just, where's my dole out, where's my check, that's going to be, that's going to bite you in the end. So even people that don't have much, they can get by if they just have a little knowledge. A little knowledge can be a dangerous thing, or it can be something that can really perpetuate your life. And so that's why, again, I don't intend for this program to be some kind of a documentary on what, survivalism, in and of itself, but just to kind of harken back to that mentality. And again, I am showing these images of these plants that are edible or can be prepared. And the one image, with the exception of one of the last images, which is the poison ivy plant, and they took the opportunity to show the poison ivy plant among these other photos. Nothing in the poison ivy plant is good, and I think most are aware of that. Poison oak, poison sumac, poison ivy, none of those things are things you want to mess around with. None of that plant is good for you, and even being in the proximity of that plant can give you problems. So it's something just to be cautious of, and that's why the picture was included amongst the other useful plants. Apparently, cattail is really good for has many uses for food sustenance. I'm sure I could think of a whole host of others as well. And I'm confident as well that other people will have that common sense kick in, at least to some degree, that they'll know somewhat of what's available that can be eaten. Now, granted, as I said earlier, in a nuclear event, a lot of this is going to go out the window and it's going to be, not applicable. But I think a lot of this can be applied, and I think even just getting in the habit, as I said, it can be a fun thing to go out with the kids and say, hey, look at this plant, and actually pick the plants and then actually eat them and show them, look, this can be eaten. And then obviously you want to caution young people in that respect that, you can't just go around picking everything and trying everything, and that's going to end up in the hospital. But, a good educational process with guidance, we can, I think we can gain a lot in that respect. So again, gaining that sense of community, maybe having some people you can have a contingency plan with. And then I think also, again, trusting your intuition. That is so important. We have to really build that intuition like a muscle, like a bodybuilder. I think that's intuition / psychic capacity that we have as humanity that's becoming more in evidence in humanity, are things that need to be fostered and effort put into. And this is again, I think like a bodybuilder, we can gain from using our energetic capacity to intuit, understand, and this will help us in the innovation process. So that recognition, that intuitive recognition, how do we build that? How do we build that muscle? How do we, how do we use it, basically? Well, it's really ultimately based on trusting oneself and having the firm, without question, certain knowledge that you can intuit, you can gain past what's around you physically, you can perceive past what's readily and immediately available in front of you. You can look past that and see into the energetic. And so you can look into your brother's heart, in my estimation, and gain some understanding, get past the fear, anxiety, whatever the front emotions are, whatever the facade, the personality is, and get into the intuitive, energetic understanding of where that person's coming from. And I think that will help people to build upon that capacity. If you work around people enough, you hopefully can start to build that in and get to know people. Some people have more of a knack for it than others as far as recognizing, these innate qualities in others. So it's something that, to consider. So also in the event of no power, no store availability in the traditional sense, barter and trade would be much more, viable and would become, much more common among people if these things were to happen. And so keeping in mind what we can use to trade and barter with. And that's why some survivalist manuals do highly recommend carrying around that fifth of Jack Daniels, because, in times of need, people are going to want to still alleviate, or forget about things. That's something that's so innately prevalent in humanity, that we like to forget our troubles, and so we like to intoxicate ourselves, inebriate ourselves, and just forget about the troubles of the day. Just let all that wash away. And so if somebody has a fifth of Jack Daniels to wash a bit of that away with, even temporarily, they might be willing to part with much. And so I'm not encouraging you, to take somebody's life savings, because they're craving the jack, and they've got, all this food or water, and you're gonna, put the sham on them. That's not the kind of attitude or mentality that the show is hoping to foster, or that it ever would hope to foster. But again, that in the sense of barter and trade, I don't see a problem with that, and that's why I don't see a problem with, as I spoke earlier, the hemp/cannabis culture that's developed. That's so prominent in not just this, very much in this country certainly, but worldwide. There's a whole culture, and the young people are very well versed. And I don't encourage that, quite frankly. I really don't encourage anybody to experiment with that sort of thing until you're at least 18, maybe very sparingly through high school, kind of here and there. But the people that, the kids that are sitting at the bus stops in the morning smoking the blunts before they go to school, I can't see that being detrimental. So I really discourage that. And that might seem hypocritical to some people, that I would be sitting here saying, don't do that. But, there's a time and place for things. And I think that can be a viable option to have hemp available to grow. And so it's something that grows very readily and very, it grows wild everywhere pretty easily. And that's why there's so much hemp, like in the Midwest. There are just fields and fields of it. It is hemp. It's not cannabis. You can't go out and smoke it, dry it out and smoke it, because you'll get a headache. It doesn't have the THC in it. But you can eat it. You can eat the whole plant all day long. And you can use the fibers, obviously, as people have, for various uses. And I think that in the event of a prolonged period of time without there being access to food, I think the hemp economy would almost be the main economy in so many respects, because you can make oil, you can do a lot of things with it. It's a very versatile plant. It's the one plant that I think would help humanity get through something of this magnitude, with the greatest ease. So that's something I would want to really factor in and have people consider. So, and that in respect to that culture as well, people are in the event of famine and all that. There are people that are going to still want to find the herb. Trust me, and so that could be a serious bargaining, leveraging tool in that respect. And that's just another aspect of that to consider. And so. Saving seeds of any type, I think, is very, very beneficial. Not specifically cannabis seeds, but saving all sorts of seeds, I think. Certain seeds don't readily reproduce. That's one thing as well. Over years, you've gotten this GMO, genetically modified sort of thing, and we've had to harken back to what are called heirloom seeds, the original seeds that can continue to reproduce, from the original earlier lines. Without, again, having a cockroach gene spliced into it or something like that. So, there are these things that in the plants and stuff that we ingest that are definitely not any good for us. And so, how are we gonna? We need to make sure that we can attain seeds that can take root and that aren't just dud seeds because they've been, rendered. Null and void basically by some kind of breeding process or modification process, and that they're not fertile, they're sterile. So that's another consideration along those lines. But there's a lot that can be used for food, make no mistake about it. And getting back to the original photos that I showed at the beginning, hopefully these are a little clearer than the initial ones. But you may actually be able to go out and identify some of these, and certainly the sunflower and the dandelion would be two, and others I mentioned earlier in the show that I know are around this area that people will be familiar with, pecan trees, mulberry, the loquats, persimmons, pomegranates, grapes, honeysuckle, the dandelion we saw earlier as well. There are a number of these that are available in there, so most people recognize, and so that's something to, again, be considered. Again, I was going to give more specific preparation for some of the images that I'm showing, but I would at this point, again, encourage people that are interested in this subject matter to go out and try to find what's available in your own yard and in your neighborhood, I guess, so to speak, and wherever you might anticipate finding yourself in the event of things not being so hunky-dory, so to speak. Again, using your intuition, I think, is something that we really need to build up and factor in. Now, certainly, humanity is quite resilient. We, as humanity, are almost like cockroaches in so many ways that you have a hard time killing us off. And even though we've had in our past plagues, and we've had war and pestilence and all this sort of thing, and famine, certainly vast famine, potato famine, what have you. We can think of historical events where masses of people have passed away. And so that being the case, there are, I think, there's always going to be a segment of humanity that's going to get by and live and do fine or do reasonably well, even in the worst, most adverse situations. I think there are those also that are not going to cut the grade, make the grade, and there are a lot of people that have health problems and a lot of other issues that would prevent them from sustaining themselves without normal society being in place. And so, my heart does go out to people that are going to have a hard time in the eventuality of something like this happening. But being the esotericist that I am, I cannot help but hearken back or fall back on the law, the divine law, and in this respect, the law of karma. I do feel that karma is real and does play out in people's lives, and that in the event of where masses of people have died, whether that was in war, there's certain situations where, 5 brothers go to war, 1 makes it back. How do you really account for that sort of thing? The plane crashes and there are 3 survivors and 200 die. I think when there's a mass amount of death, a large number of casualties collectively like that it's the economy of God playing out. And that may seem a little bit callous to some, but it is what it is. I think we have group karma in many respects. I think we do work things out cyclically, in a group fashion. And so by that sort of logic, I think we, in a bad case scenario, we will intuitively find the community that we need to assemble and get together with the people that we need to. Granting the karmic situations are apt and appropriate. If your karmic card is up, then you may not make it through some sort of a cataclysm, earthquake, hurricane, again, whatever the case may be. There are a lot of different things available. So a lot of different things that could potentially befall us. So, again, I think there's a karmic component that has to come in to play here that we should consider, factor in. So, if people perish, it's not for no reason. So that's just one aspect of that. Okay, we are rapidly running out of time. We have about 4 minutes left. I don't think I'm going to get to the calls. I consider that, but I actually had more information available than I thought. So again, we could take the biblical attitude and have the honey and wild honey and locust. And again, I wanted to caution people, not to be fearful, not to, a gun culture, I think, in this country is a good thing. D.C. just repealed the handgun ban. I think that's a good thing. If you look at where the most crime takes place, like D.C., Chicago, it's where the handguns are illegal. Let's see, a criminal is gonna buy a gun and wait patiently. No, come on, people, common sense. Guns can prevent crime just by that energetic. If the criminal feels that there may be a gun or a threat to their existence, they're not going to be as likely to take that chance. It's an energetic. And that's why I am a proponent of the Second Amendment, because the energetic, when you understand things in an esoteric fashion, is plays very prominently in the mix there. And so, again, not trying to foster the gun culture mentality. I don't encourage people to, in a bad situation, to go out and take from your neighbors, take from others. Karma will come back to bite you in that instance. I feel very firmly that if you go out with a band of roving marauders and you just take things and revert back to subhuman mentality and way of living, that will visit you in a real fashion. So as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is, the biblical phrase goes. And I do firmly believe that myself, that if we can keep an open, calm attitude in the midst of the storm, be that calm center in the midst of much chaos, we can get through things much more easily. We can get through things collectively. We always have things we can fall back on. We're never alone, even in the most trying times where it seems like everything's lined up against us. We really are not alone. Just simply by virtue of the soul that we have a link to the divine that keeps us constantly in contact and connection with our greater selves ultimately. So we should always keep that link in mind. Again, the attitude of gratitude, I think, is something to foster and confirm and reaffirm on a daily basis. Just to be thankful for what we have, and thankful for any opportunities that come our way, and also equally thankful for the adversities and the stumbling blocks and things like that that give us our lessons that we need to learn in life. There's just so much life experience, so much beauty, and so much to be gained in life that to not sample of the backyard buffet, so to speak, would be a real mistake. So I encourage people, just get out there, experience life, say hello to your neighbor, hug your kids, all that kind of stuff. That's good advice all across the board. So just kind of let's have that communal mentality. Let's try to help one another and not hurt one another. Not just here in Austin, but we can set an example here in Austin, I think, and that's something that I really hope to continue to do, because I feel that we have fostered a sense of community here that can be built upon. That model can be replicated, and I think it is being replicated. I think there are those people out there in other places that have a similar kind of mindset, that are looking at things in the same fashion, that they'll help out in their area. So let's all hope that that is the case. I'm pretty firmly convinced that it is. Rapidly running out of time here, so I do want to thank everyone that's viewed. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I want to thank Jack for coming on down, helping out, and helping to navigate this evening. I want to just remind you that we're here every Thursday. We won't be here on the 3rd. We won't be here next